I became a songwriter because these are stories that I wanted to tell. These are songs that I wanted to sing. And I think, and I started doing that late in life. So the things that really interested me most, the stories I wanted to tell, were historical things, historical events, things that helped make me who I am. My Irish culture, that's where I started, and then American history, the Civil War in particular, but the immigration story and that sort of thing. And in my reading, reading historical books, reading histories, reading diaries, that sort of thing, I found a lot of stories that I found inspiring on the human level, So the history is the backdrop for my stories, but it's the human story, I chose that story to sing because it moved me on a human level for some reason or other. I wrote more songs for the soundtrack than we actually ended up using. And that's because I was involved with Ken during the process. And I knew the story as it was developing, as he was talking about how he wanted to retell these stories. I wrote a song about some of the bushwhacker experience, a Bloody Bill Anderson song, that sort of thing. And of course, it didn't fit with the storyline later on, but that didn't matter to me. I was truly inspired by the stories and wanted to retell those stories, and I wrote those songs. And in fact, they appeared on other albums. I play them at my concerts, and people love the songs, even though it didn't fit in the movie. So in truth, I wrote, I don't know, I might have written 5 or 6 specifically for the film. There was one song in particular that I wrote for the film specifically that just, it moved me to tears right from the start, and that was Shines Like Gold. We had talked, Ken and I, so much about the meaning of the film and the title and so forth, and I just had a strong feeling for how I wanted it to sound and how I wanted it to feel, and we had talked so much about some of the specifics of the film, the concept of the road to Valhalla. These guys are warriors, and yes, they were warrior enemies on the battlefield, but now after 20 years, 30 years, many years later gone by, they recognize the camaraderie that they had even with their enemies, and hence the concept of Valhalla. They'll go to that grand hall in the afterlife. I hope people notice that I actually likened the concept of Valhalla to our concept of paradise or heaven, or the afterlife, the Christian concept. But basically, I stayed true to that sort of notion, and that was the whole purpose of the song, was to provide the backdrop of feeling and some of the understanding behind the title of the film. As a musician, I love collaboration. I'm a solo performer. This is how I make my living. But I so often run into, especially at Irish festivals and Scottish festivals and even some of the Civil War events that I've done, I run into fellow musicians, and sometimes they're old friends and sometimes they're new friends. And I just love playing with other people, and that's one of those things that musicians love to do. And so it was great to have the opportunity to bring in other people on the recordings of the new songs, but also to purposely seek out opportunities to work with some folks. Ken and I had talked earlier on about the possibility of using some of the period hymns for this film, as to at least have available to use in the soundtrack. And I thought about using a choir, and the Northfield School Kids Choir is just terrific, and they were wonderful to work with, and worked with them on an album project. And we recorded a couple of pieces that I thought were just beautiful. And Swing Low, Sweet Chariot was the one we ended up using in the film. And the kids' enthusiasm and their skill was just remarkable. And spent a lot of time putting that together. We recorded it quickly, and there were noises and things that I had to fix because we recorded it in the school. But it was just a wonderful experience because they did such a great job. The singers did, and it just gave it a big fat sound, a big choral sound. There were only 40 voices there, but it sounds like 100. And then we had the opportunity to work with Michael Martin Murphey on the project as well. One of my musical heroes. Fellow's been a star in the world of cowboy and country music ever since I've been an adult, and what a treat it was to work with him. I didn't know how it was going to be producing a recording from somebody, a star that I've never met. And he walked into the studio, and within 10 minutes, we're actually working on music. He was a delight to work with, and we hit it off beautifully musically, and he brought along a couple of wonderful players. And it was just a treat to work with him. Well, I think the significance of the story for me starts with the reunification. For me, as I looked at this story, I kind of started at the end of the story, putting this all back together again and recognizing, as the soldiers did, the camaraderie that they had with their fellow warriors, even if they were enemies. But that was also significant of the fact that America was doing that generally. We were recognizing how important it was to preserve the Union. I know that many of the Southern soldiers and officers really didn't want to leave the Union. They had Union sentiments, and of course they left because their state left, and that was their home, and that was their first choice. And I understand that actually very well, but the reunification, I think, was the first thing that I thought about from the perspective of the story, why it was so important. And then the telling of the tale, again, the historical backdrop is, the border wars or the war in the West. Earlier, I was born in the Boston area. I grew up there, and moved to Texas in 1986, and that's when I found out I was a Yankee. And, I told that joke so many times I had to go and write the song. But it's actually true, I was genuinely curious. All of a sudden, I began to realize just how important was this event that we call the Civil War. So many of my Yankee friends now, when I go back up north and play up there, I've been, jokingly accused of becoming a Confederate. The truth is, I definitely have Southern sympathies. I have a real South positive message. There's so many things that I love and admire about living in the South and living in the West, Texas in particular. I wasn't born there, but that's where I choose to live. And so this is an important story for me to tell, sure, to be part of. I recognize both sides for sure, and I see the heroics, and I see the what's the word? I don't know. I guess I just see the heroics on both sides, and I have at this point, it's 150 years later. I don't see why I would have to choose sides. We have been reunited, and I'm glad about that. The recording process was very interesting. I thought about this as I was thinking about the writing of the songs and working with Ken on developing the music and talking about ideas and of the kinds of music, the kinds of songs, the kinds of subjects that would be interesting. I had a feeling if Ken didn't like my music already, he wouldn't have asked me. So I thought, okay, what are the flavors of music that I want to hear in this film? And so that's why I suggested things like hymns and banjo music and fiddle and whistle and that Celtic feel, the American music feel. So while I was thinking about all of that, I was also thinking about how to record this. I'd already decided I wanted to have some real bare sounding recordings. I want just banjo sometimes. And then you add a guitar, and then you add a flute or a whistle, that sort of thing. And so the recording process I thought about for a long time, as well as I thought about the music and what we had put aside. And I had a long list of songs that I wanted to consider recording, and I even sought out other people's recordings and so on. And that list of songs just kind of got whittled down. And then it was the recording time, and went into the studio with a very good friend of mine who's just a wonderful sound engineer, Travis Ener. He's got a little studio up in north side of Dallas, and we just began picking away at these songs and recording them. Some of them I recorded just live, and those are the tracks that we kept and used. And then we thought about them and brought in other players. I brought in a wonderful fiddle player from the Dallas area, Linda Ralph, who plays with a lot of the Irish bands and that sort of thing. That's her background. Likewise, a wonderful flute player. I'm sorry, I keep saying flute. He plays a penny whistle, Irish whistle. Played the low whistle quite a bit. A simply beautiful, beautiful player, and he plays with the Dallas Symphony and Dallas Wind Symphony, and he plays with a number of the bands from the area. So, with those handful of collaborators, I did a lot of the instruments myself, and it was a great process. I enjoyed doing it.